Thank you so much. It's always a little embarrassing to hear you introduced in these, often glowing terms, but thank you so much. Good morning to everybody, to the dignitaries here, the Honorable Chief Minister, Shri Yediyurappa, the Honorable Deputy Chief Minister, Shri Ashwath Narayanan, the Honorable Vice Chancellor of Bangalore University, Dr. Venugopal, Professor Ishwara, whom we just heard from, fellow academics, emerging scholars, students, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to be here as part of the International Conference on Media Education, hosted by Bangalore University to commemorate 100 years of journalism and mass communication education in India. I'm grateful to Dr. B.K. Ravi and the organizing committee for having invited me to deliver the keynote address. It's indeed quite an honor and a lot of pleasure. So I myself am a product of one of the oldest departments of journalism in the country, Osmania University, and now as a member of one of the newer, but certainly not very new departments at the University of Hyderabad, I feel particularly grateful for this opportunity in which I can reflect a little bit on the big picture of media and communication education in India. Just a few months ago, I engaged in a similar reflection as part of the final plenary of the IMCR annual conference, where the focus was on the future rather than the past. And I realized then that in some ways, those two directions are actually convergent. We cannot think of the future without considering what we bring from the past. In that event, we talked about the challenge of the digital. In the Indian context, especially now, with our issues of uneven access and differential levels of digital literacy. But as this year has shown us, it's a challenge that cannot be ignored, whether in media education specifically or in education more generally. But that perhaps is another conversation for another time. For now, let me focus on the broader theme of the conference and some more general reflections on the challenges and opportunities for media education. I myself come to media education after several years as a practitioner, and even today, after one decade in the university, I'm constantly navigating these worlds. How can we teach journalism and communication in a way that combines intellectual rigor with strong skills in writing, image making, storytelling, and analysis? How can we produce students who are lifelong learners, who can turn the media industry into what we would like it to be? A true pillar of democracy. How do we as media educators position ourselves within the academy? And how do we serve our many constituencies, students, the industry, the academy, our own society and that of the world, and of course the environment? We can probably add to that list. These are all big questions, and I think some of them will be addressed in the many excellent sessions that I see that you have planned over the next 2 days. 100 years is certainly a milestone, and looking at our history can ground us in important and insightful ways and help to give us some direction in which to proceed. To trace the beginnings of anything can be a very tricky endeavor, but it's also a necessary one. And understanding our history, indeed situating ourselves on a timeline, can be both affirming and productive. Journalism as an academic discipline, that is, one that belongs in universities, is now taken for granted, but it hasn't always been so. Despite its long presence in the halls of higher learning, after all, we are celebrating 100 years of this, it's often been seen as a vocational stream, one whose aim is to produce human resources for the media sector, rather than one that builds knowledge. But as Professor Ishwara mentioned, we are in the business of producing knowledge. Depending on where one looks, there are different origin stories for journalism education and communication education in India. One version has it beginning with Annie Besant in the Adyar Theosophical Society in 1920. Hence, 2020 becomes the 100th year. Followed in the next decade by diploma courses at Aligarh Muslim University and Bhavans Institute in Kochi. Another trajectory takes in Punjab University in 1941. I would argue that these two are both legitimate points of origin, each representing different aspects of what we now call journalism and communication education. a broader, more inclusive conception of a discipline that encompasses media practice, as well as its critique and research into its processes and products. One can be fairly certain that there would have been some form of journalism apprenticeship and informal training decades before that, as long as there have been newspapers and any form of public communication, in fact. But for the sake of convenience, let us say that it was 100 years ago that the first curriculum-driven attempt was made to develop talent for this fundamental democratic institution of media. It then becomes a precursor to the other great democratic project, that of building a nation out of the detritus of colonialism. And if we are to accept that origin story in which Annie Besant features, these two projects of a courageous and strong media and a self-determining nation are closely intertwined, both metaphorically and materially, in the person of Besant, who also played a not inconsequential role in the independence movement. I think that particular juxtaposition is important to remember as we continue to train young journalists and communicators who we hope will embody the principles of a critical and independent media and an empathetic professional communication sector. This is something we need even more urgently today, affected as we are by infodemics of different kinds in health, in politics, in culture. The media and communication are certainly sectors of prime importance, requiring well-trained, thinking individuals who can make the right judgments at different levels. But I'm going to leave the writing of history to the media historians, and in turn, turn towards a consideration of the present so that we can also think about the future of media education. Professor Ravi mentioned that there are over 1,000 programs offering some form of media education in India, both private and public. As most of us here would know, university undergraduate programs usually have journalism and communication, along with many other subjects, a selection of subjects in humanities and social sciences, focus exclusively on media skills and related subjects. Postgraduate programs like those offered at the University of Hyderabad and also at Bangalore University allow specialization within media streams while also introducing students to research. There's quite a wide variety among departments in the country, and as a consequence, again, as Professor Ishwaraya mentioned, debate exists around issues of standardization. So if you graduated from Tezpur University, you would probably have been through a very different kind of program than if you'd gone to Gujarat University or Anna University or even the University of Hyderabad. Over the years, there have been several critical studies of journalism education in India, beginning with a highly cited review by Professors Eapen and Thakur in 1989. There's agreement that journalism training needs to combine critical thinking and an understanding of social, political, and economic realities. There's also agreement that the location of journalism as an academic discipline is crucial to achieving the larger democratic purpose of the fourth estate. There seems to be concurrence and an assumption about having faculty who can deliver these twin objectives of critical thinking and skills. The criticisms over the years have also remained fairly consistent. The gap between industry and academia, again mentioned by several previous speakers, needs to be narrowed. Students need a more solid grounding in applied ethics, and we need to keep up with the changes in technology. Any discussion of the future of media education needs to address these issues. I'll try to look at each of these briefly. First, the industry-academia gap. This is a challenge that faces not only media departments, but all academic disciplines that serve a professional sector, whether it's management or social work or law. Just as the best business schools have a continuous and symbiotic relationship with the corporate world, it's important for journalism schools to build strong relationships with professional journalists and with media organizations so that evolving best practices and management practices can be taken into account. But as academia, we have an ability to critically reflect on media practice and the ability to contextualize it, so that too should be added to the mix. And that's something we can offer the media. But media organizations can give us a reality check so that our syllabi and our classroom instruction is in sync with contemporary practice. I know that this is already happening to some extent in departments, including my own, but it would be good to have a more systematic and deeper collaboration. The idea of professors of practice, for instance, mid or late career journalists who can give a year or two to education, would be one way to do this. We could also think of sabbaticals that allow academics to spend a few months periodically in newsrooms so that they can see how practices have changed. Basically, we need to find regular channels of communication and interchange between academia and industry. Next, the ethical grounding. With the increasing prevalence of fake news fueled by image manipulation and technology-enabled sharing, unverified claims masquerading as news, opinion disguised as fact, the climate of journalistic practice has become quite complex. While journalism education can certainly not correct all the problems besetting industry, we can try to give our students the critical and ethical tools that can help them navigate this space. Usually our ethics training is restricted to just one course among a dozen, but we need to perhaps focus on discussions around ethics through all our courses. An ethical compass is very closely tied to a deep understanding of context, and this is something we need to create opportunities for. And communication is a crossroads discipline, as it has been often said, and it must produce students who can occupy that intersection with an appreciation of multiple disciplines and knowledge bases. These days, media education finds itself in a rather strange position. At the core of our teaching is the belief that journalism matters, that it can be a force for good, for positive change, for calling out the wrongs of those in power and pointing to what's unjust in our society and polity. But at the same time, trust in media institutions is eroding, and there's a widespread sense in the public that journalists are no longer the independent voices that they can depend on. The nexus between politics, business, and media further complicates this and narrows the space for independent coverage. So how can we educate our young students in a way that allows them to navigate this complex landscape of mistrust and powerful negative forces, and yet hold on to their ideals, their ethical center? How do they balance pragmatism and idealism? These are questions that we must grapple with as teachers in our classrooms and in our conferences. This is certainly a tall order for any department, to not only offer a grounding in skills, but to also develop the intellectual capacities to look at society and culture critically, empathetically, and with curiosity tinged with humility. This means that we need the kind of people who can deliver such an education, and we need to invest in such faculty. There is criticism that public universities and colleges have found it difficult to keep up with the rapid changes in technology, that modes and methods of journalism taught in universities are out of sync with contemporary newsrooms. This is a valid criticism to some extent, as universities, especially public institutions like my own, have found it difficult to upgrade their infrastructure and keep up with industry. But pedagogy is a problem too, and this manifests in two major ways. A little acknowledged but widely experienced issue, and I think all of you teachers out there will empathize with this, is the absence of evidence-based or thoughtful strategies to address the needs of a socially, culturally, and linguistically diverse student body. And this is a student body that enters higher education with an often inadequate level of undergraduate preparation. And this is something that's particularly observed at departments like mine, which offer only a master's program. And accompanying this is the absence of good training programs for young faculty, many of whom come to the teaching of media without themselves having ever worked in industry. Capacity building of faculty, therefore, must be an ongoing process. And this is something that organizations like ICA, IMCR, and others within India are very keen on focusing on. And this cannot be relegated to simply doing a few approved courses to fulfill API requirements. And communication departments across the country need to collaborate to come up with continuing education programs, maybe in conjunction with industry, to ensure that our methods and our content are in line with what is in demand. At the same time, if we are to retain our critical edge as a discipline that not only feeds media practice, but also contributes to it, we must balance the need to service the industry with creative and skilled young professionals with the need to move our often flawed media systems in new directions. After all, universities are, or should be, places where society is continually remade in a more just, more equitable, and more creative image. Another area where university departments can do better is in media literacy efforts. And we need to help build these skills in the general public. And recent times have underscored the need for everyone to become critical and informed media consumers. But notwithstanding these challenges, as we move into the second century of media education in our country, we have much to be proud of. We have a diverse range of programs, and young people across the country can find a place to apply to no matter where they are. Media studies is no longer a marginal discipline, with practically every large university boasting of a department, not to mention several mass communication universities devoted to the discipline. In the 80s, when I completed my journalism degree at Osmania University, there were no doctoral programs to speak of. In the 90s, when I returned from the US with a PhD, there were a handful, but the number of seats in most places was in the low single digits. Today, all the major departments offer doctoral programs and receive hundreds of applications from hopeful candidates. Scholarship is thriving, with Indian researchers regularly publishing in flagship journals, while also bringing out a number of edited and authored volumes with top-of-the-line publishers. There's much to feel good about, but as I have outlined in these past several minutes, many challenges remain. We need more forums like this where we can come together as fellow educators to find ways to keep our programs energetic, rigorous, and relevant, and where we can learn from each other's approaches and share our experiences. Conferences such as these give us opportunities, and we must make the most of them to zoom into the issues that are important. Once again, my heartfelt thanks to the organizing committee of ICME 2020. Best wishes for a productive 2 days. Thank you.